Why did I let you guys pick the next game for me to play? I have this whole stack of games over here that I want to play and review, but instead you guys chose for me to play Frontlines, Fuel of War. Like, what is this? I could be playing the OG Splinter Cell right now, a game I've never played before, by the way, but instead I got to spend my weekend playing this train wreck of a game. I didn't play Frontlines when it came out. It came out at a time when I didn't have an Xbox 360 and the only console I had was a PlayStation 3. So one night back in November of 2007, there was this massive thunderstorm that was raging and lightning struck a power pole on our street. And after that night, the network card on our Xbox 360 just absolutely refused to connect to Xbox Live. GameStop wouldn't honor their warranty and neither would Xbox because we couldn't prove that it wasn't the router or our internet connection. We ended up selling that Xbox to GameStop and they never checked if it could even connect to Xbox Live. So they ate the cost either way. We wouldn't get another Xbox 360 until the summer of 2008. So instead of playing Frontlines, we got to dive into all the great PS3 games that were out at the time, like Warhawk, Resistance, Fall of Man, and Metal Gear Solid 4. Frontlines Fuel of War is a near-futuristic, modern dystopian, post-apocalyptic, environmentally conscious, squad-based, vehicle-focused, military tech first-person shooter developed by Chaos Studios. Chaos Studios was formed from the team behind the Desert Combat mod for Battlefield 1942, a mod that was so popular that they would actually go on to form their own studio called Trauma Studios. DICE Interactive acquired Trauma Studios so that they could help with making Battlefield 2 before shutting down the studio just a couple of months before Battlefield 2 was released. The team was scrambling around to find funding, and THQ later offered the team a publishing agreement, and that's how Chaos Studios was born. Unfortunately, Chaos Studios would only release 2 games before they closed their doors: Frontlines Fuel of War in 2008 and Homefront in 2011. Both games were published by THQ, and let me just say, THQ released some really awesome games back in the day. There was Battle for Bikini Bottom, Destroy All Humans, Company of Heroes, Saints Row, Stalker, Evil Dead, Warhammer 40k Space Marine, and all these games. And don't forget about the greatest game to ever exist. Are You Smarter Than a Fifth Grader?
Hi, I'm Jeff Foxworthy, and welcome to Are You Smarter Than a Fifth Grader?
There is a story campaign in Frontlines, but it's pretty laughable. It's really only there as a setup for the multiplayer. You see, this is one of those games that was designed to be entirely about the multiplayer, and the single player is actually the tacked on portion of the game. And the story is pretty short. It only runs for about 4 to 5 hours. The difference here is that this came out before live service was a thing, so this never had any of the microtransactions or seasonal content that we've grown accustomed to these years. Man, 2008 just hit different. Some games from that era that had this design model that come to my mind are Brink, the Alien vs. Predator remake, and obviously the Battlefield series. That is before Bad Company came out later in 2008. Set in the far-off future of 2024, lol, oil reserves are running out and the world is descending into madness. As if the energy crisis weren't enough, an avian flu outbreak sweeps across the world. With supplies waning and countries running out of food, diplomatic relations between nation-states collapses. Russia and China realize that they're better off joining together and they form the Red Star Alliance, while the NATO countries form the Coalition. The Red Star Alliance moves into Turkmenistan and a full-scale war breaks out over control over the last remaining oil fields in the Caspian Sea. The game opens with this vignette-style cutscene to give all the backstory and set up one of the main characters, this guy. This reporter guy. His name is, well, I just spent 5 hours playing this game and reviewing the footage, and I still don't know this guy's name. So let me just look it up real quick. Wayne Andrews. What a generic name. If they're gonna use a generic name, then I will too. Aiden Michaels explains how he grew up in this era of depleted oil. He explains that he was pulled from school when there weren't enough vaccines for the avian flu. And damn, that's actually a really emotional story. It makes me feel kind of bad for Kyle Wilson. Mark Johnson here grows up and joins the Associated Press and is sent to cover the small towns in Turkmenistan, where oil companies are building quick drilling operations. And we get a generically chilling line followed by the game's logo.
The storm is coming.
One long loading screen later, and we get the game's logo again, in case you already forgot. Brad Campbell is on a chopper with an army squad being deployed to perform guard duty on a mining town. We're introduced to Sergeant Thompson and to the rest of the Stray Dog squad. Except none of these guys seem to have names. I've watched all of the footage and I've looked into all of the wikis and I can't find any names for these guys. The chopper gets shot down, because of course it does, and we get this amazing close-up shot of the chaos. Incoming! It then cuts to a first-person perspective and Michael Williams gets captured while trying to make sure we're okay, and we finally get to play the damn game. The first thing you'll notice is that it's one of those first-person shooters. You know, the ones that have no weight, no impact, no gore. It feels like a PS2 game. You could really tell that these guys spent a lot of their time in Battlefield 1942, so I fight my way through this mining town, taking stock of all the verticality in the maps. My first objective is to secure 2 capture points on the map to gain a foothold on the battlefield. Little did I know that this would be the objective for every single mission.
What? Hey! Hello? What? Why?
As I fight my way through the enemies, I notice that there are these red circles to indicate the enemy's position. You see, Frontlines has a HUD system that is trying to mirror the Future Force Warrior program piloted by the military. Ghost Recon Advanced Warfighter did the same thing, but it did it infinitely better. As I make my way up the stairs to capture the first objective, I get my first death when I take a rocket launcher straight to the face. Here I learn that the mission doesn't end when you die. Instead, you get a menu to redeploy and to change your equipment. And that's when it clicked with me that I'm not playing as any character. That's right, you're not a main character in this game. You're a nobody, just like real life. After using a demo charge to destroy the first objective, I pick up a rocket launcher and I make my way to the second objective. You may notice that my aim is horrible, and it's because the controls are horrendous. I tried to adjust the sensitivity, but it's either too high or it's too low. Hip firing is inaccurate as all hell, and when you aim down the scope, the gun disappears. The rounds from the rifle spray all over the place, but it requires you to be incredibly precise with your aim. It just all feels so cheap and low budget in its execution. Between me and the next objective is a vehicle that I blast with the rocket launcher, and with the second objective secured, I make my way over to the motor pool to capture it. The Red Star troops have closed the gate, and it's here that the game introduces us to its unique feature, drones. So I launch this helicopter drone and I fly it all the way up into the control tower and self-destruct it to destroy the gate controls so that the stray dogs can flood in and capture the motor pool. Around the corner, I find another drone, the assault drone. This minigun on wheels is so badass. It rolls around and decimates enemies. It kinda reminds me of the HK tanks from the Terminator series. With the tower secure, the mission ends and it's on to the next. This mission is a vehicle section. We take control of a Humvee with a machine gun and a rocket launcher. I didn't notice this until I was watching the footage, but my wheel actually fell through the ground here. With the East Refinery secure, I pick up a rocket launcher and I proceed over to secure the Central and West refineries. The objective then becomes to rescue the reporter, Josh Lewis. So I drive over, but I find a tank protecting the entrance. After playing a little peekaboo with the enemies, I blow up the tank, enter the facility, and I find the reporter locked in a room. For some reason, the best option is to place a demolition charge on the door, and I think our troops might need to be trained on the basics of physics to learn that the door is probably just gonna fly into the room and kill the reporter. With Wyatt Marshall saved, we get to the chopper and make our escape. It then cuts to another scene in a chopper, and Sergeant Thompson gives one of the worst rallying speeches ever recorded.
All right, men, listen close. And for those of you who haven't yet had the pleasure of my command, listen close.
In case you didn't know, you should listen close. So we're deployed and our objective is to secure the town housing a Red Star garrison. While clearing out the town, I find a sniper rifle on a rooftop. After securing the town, I quickly move through and secure the next 2 objectives and find another drone. This one is the Tiger Claw attack drone. This thing sounds like it shoots bottle rockets and has about the same effectiveness. This is supposed to be a deadly war machine, but I've seen more effectiveness from people shooting actual bottle rockets at each other. I move on to complete the next 2 objectives, securing the motor pool and blowing up the Red Star's anti-air missile installation. Then I hop into a light tank to square off against the Red Star tanks in the valley. My tank gets blown up and I'm left out in the open as a sitting duck. The tanks make very quick work of me, and as I go to redeploy, the game bugs out and these tanks spawn on top of each other and flip out. So instead of going into the Valley of Tanks, I make my way across the bridge where I encounter another enemy tank. After dispatching it, I find an unused tank in the depot and I try to steal it, but the wreckage of the tank I destroyed is now blocking the exit. So instead, I hop out and I capture the objective on foot, where I find a target designator for calling in a carpet bomb airstrike. I call in the airstrike on a wave of enemies approaching, and it's pretty sweet. I mean, it's no Helldivers 2, but it's still pretty cool. With the wave taken out, I realize the wreckage of the enemy tank has disappeared, so I can now swipe that tank from earlier. There's just one problem with my plan. I somehow wedged the tank in there. So instead, I hop into my light tank, and I make my way into the valley to destroy the remaining tanks to end the level. Our next mission is to neutralize and capture some Red Star tank factories. The mission is short, and it's more of the same. We then get a cutscene where Max Carver explains that the war has spread into Korea and the Chinese have taken Taiwan.
Taiwan #1!
The next mission is a recon mission where you're deployed on your own. But again, if you die, you can just redeploy. It doesn't make any sense, but I guess you're not supposed to think too hard about it. The first objective is to eliminate 3 guard outposts, so I send my drone in to scout the battlefield. But it gets a little too far out of range and it gets shot down. So I pull out my sniper rifle and I go to take out the enemy. And for whatever reason, I just could not hit the enemies with the sniper rifle. The best way I can describe the sniper rifle in this game is that it requires too much precision. If you aren't dead square on the enemy, then your shot will miss. But it's also really difficult to aim because the sensitivity is either too slow or too fast. The reticle has no acceleration or deceleration like it does in other games like Call of Duty. It moves at full speed the moment you touch the joystick, and it stops on a dime where you let go of it. There's also this very, very subtle magnetism on the enemies that's trying to help give you some aim assist, but it just throws off your timing with the joystick. After finally getting some aim figured out, I capture the first 2 guard posts, and then I realize I have a shotgun.
This is my boomstick!
After clearing out the 3rd guard post, I push up to the next objective. And this is the point where I actually felt like this game really sucked and I just wanted to quit and give up and stop playing. With the snipers up on the hill 2-shotting me and the lack of hit detection on my sniper, I was ready to just turn the game off for the night. But I pushed on to secure the guard post, dealt with a little bit more awful hit detection, and got stuck facing 2 turrets that you apparently can't headshot the enemies through even though you can see them through the hole. Down to my last life, I sent in the drone to get the job done. And with the area clear, I knock out the AA site and I end the mission. After another really long loading screen, we pick up right where we left off, but now we have reinforcement. The goal is to secure the town up ahead. Once that's done, we have to hold out against waves of enemies that are trying to capture the objective points. I like this. It added a lot of variety to the mission structure. Too bad it never comes back again. While getting distracted with the awful sniping controls, I failed to defend one of the points, so I make my way over, rocketing down the defenders to resecure the position. A second wave comes and the enemies once again secure the motor pool. A few deaths go by at the hands of this tank, and now I have to reclaim the headquarters. Thankfully, once I secure the HQ again, the mission ends and we get the best cutscene in the whole game.
I'm here in the deserts at the edge of Kazakhstan with the members of the Stray Dog Strike Force. They are, as we speak, advancing north across the Russian border in a move by Coalition Command that can only be considered as either gutsy.
Oh no, god damn it. Incoming!
What?
Run!
What is it?
Tactical nukes, god damn it! Cover! Get into the tank!
It's so dumb. I love it. The mission is to eliminate the enemy tanks in the area and push through to where the Russians launched the tactical nuke from. I can't leave my tank in this section because of the radioactive fallout, but somehow being inside the tank is fine. So I push on and I eliminate the tanks when suddenly I die out of nowhere. They did just drop a second tactical nuke. So once the 3rd wave of tanks is eliminated, I turn my attention to clearing out the enemy artillery installations. And at this point, the commander on the radio says that the fallout has decreased and I can now leave my tank. I eliminate the enemy artillery installations, then I get the fade to black for the game to load into the next section. The objective here is to stop the Russians from launching an ICBM by destroying the fuel lines. I learned that the troops have deployed an EMP device to disable my tank, and I'm forced to go out on foot. I get myself into a pretty hairy situation, so I go prone and I plant the demo charge to destroy the rocket.
The bomb has been planted!
So it turns out that the rocket didn't explode because the other fuel line didn't detonate, so we make our way over to destroy that fuel line. On the way, an enemy attack chopper shows up to ruin my day, but I pull out my rocket launcher and I get the last laugh. This is when I notice just how goofy the ragdoll physics are. When the chopper blows up, the enemy soldier just falls out. I push forward with my tank and I discover just how ineffective a tank is against ground troops. I make my way up to the tower and I make the ultimate sacrifice as the rocket explodes. It's actually really funny to me that they don't mention how the soldiers sacrificed themselves to complete the mission. The next mission is an assault on a Russian fortress. It starts with me controlling a helicopter destroying some tanks. I jump out of the chopper to secure the objective. I then push through to the second objective and I find a tank right in my face after leaving. Thankfully, I found one of these other drones that's capable of one-shotting the tank. Pushing on, I realized that the submachine gun might actually be the best weapon in the game thanks to its accuracy, range, and its lack of recoil. I make my way inside the facility and I realize that I'm inside the Hornet's nest. On the other side of the door is a tank that I knock out with another drone, and the next room is loaded with enemies and it gives me a ton of trouble. But eventually I knock out both generators and I open up the path to travel further into the fortress. We push into the launch control room and upload our own launch codes to stop the launch, but they didn't work. So we have to make our way over to the silo to stop the launch ourselves. I clear out the room thanks to some help from the drones, but somehow I get my assault drone stuck in between the walkway and the catwalk. We find out that the missile launch can't be aborted, so the corporal instead closes the silo doors so that the rocket will explode inside. We then push on to Moscow. There's a reference to this being the same path that Hitler and Napoleon took and how they failed when doing it. I kill some enemies, capture some objectives, and push on. I run into this tank while I have no rockets or C4 charges and I die. I finally realize that I can change my equipment and where I'll spawn on deployment, so I switch to the anti-vehicle class and I choose to spawn at the other point, hoping to find a tank of my own.
It was at this moment he knew. He f***ed up.
Great. So the game lets you get spawn camped. I waste a couple of my lives by accidentally clicking redeploy instead of change equipment in order to change to the other respawn point so I can find a tank of my own. I push in, plant the charge, and I complete the mission. And with the front line now pushed up past Moscow, the forces converge for a final push to secure the capital. Preston Smith here is reporting live from the top of a tank as the troops march through the city. A jet flies by and launches a missile at a helicopter, forcing him to jump. Sergeant Thompson collects the dog tags of a fallen soldier, and it turns out that black guy from earlier died. Oh no, not that guy. Our objective is to capture the communications tower and the plaza. I decide to run over this guy and his body makes my tank's physics freak out. The tank flips and explodes. So back to being on foot, I'm finally fighting a different enemy. The Russian civilians have armed themselves against our invasion. That's actually really interesting. Too bad they do nothing with it. So I capture the objectives while mowing down a few hundred civilians. Aren't I supposed to be the good guy? And I push on to secure the bridge to give us a foothold into Moscow, and we begin our push to capture the government ministry building. I make my way upstairs and neutralize the Minister of Defense. After making my way downstairs, I hop into a tank and I head over to the Ministry of Information. I make my way into the ministry and up to the rooftop. An assault helicopter shows up to try to stop me, but I send its pilot tumbling to the earth before blowing up the communications array. Not sure of the safest way to get back to the ground, I remember seeing a parachute button in the controls list. So I parachute down to my tank to prepare for the final assault. And for some reason, all of my allies have disappeared, so it's all resting on my shoulders. I deal with a few tanks with my rocket launcher, deal with some guys that are running at me out in the open, and then I hop into my own tank to finish them off. And just like that, the game's over.
More conflict. That's all any of us could count on in the future. This wasn't the end. Not by a long shot.
Frontlines never got a sequel, so the cliffhanger in this game was never resolved. But why is there even a cliffhanger in a story that only lasts 4 hours? And why are they charging $60 for a 4-hour story? It's not like there was much story to tease us with anymore anyway. No one is losing sleep wondering what happened to that guy. What was his name again? Oh yeah, he doesn't have one. The best part about this ending is the weird bugged duplication of the final line of dialogue.
I hope I'm there to see that. I really do. 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 Really do.
And that is the last we hear from Andrew Waynes. Or was it Wayne Andrews? So why do so many people love Frontlines? Well, it's because of the multiplayer mode. This review on Steam captures it best. This was Battlefield 3 before Battlefield 3 was Battlefield 3. The multiplayer objectives are the same as the campaign missions, where you're capturing objectives and you're using all kinds of vehicles to do so. When you capture an objective, you push your front lines forward. Do you get it? All of the weapons, drones, and vehicles from the campaign are here, plus a few more. There are even fighter jets. There's also a squad system to let you spawn on your squad leader, but if the squad leader is flying around, then you can't spawn on them. When choosing where to spawn, you pick one of the classes with preset weapon loadouts, and you also pick a role. The roles are a really cool system, and I love how it's decoupled from the class selection. Each role gets a special equipment item that improves as they gain experience from holding objectives or getting kills. The air support role gets access to varying levels of airstrikes. The drone technician gets access to various drones seen throughout the story. The countermeasure support role is able to use EMPs to disable enemy vehicles, and it's got some pretty creative equipment like EMP rockets. The ground support role is pretty standard. It gets access to a welding torch to repair vehicles and also to stationary guns that can be placed around. As you push your front lines forward, you get access to more vehicles and equipment, and eventually you have to capture the enemy's HQ to win the match. Other than the usual passage of time causing players to leave, the developers help to push players away by releasing a paid DLC map pack. If you didn't own the DLC, but you were in a lobby that cycled to a DLC map, you'd get kicked. This was pretty common back in the day. I mean, I remember this happening in Call of Duty 4 when they released their map pack. Frontlines had dedicated servers at launch in order to support up to 50 players in a single match. It was the largest player count for a console shooter at the time. I bet playing in a lobby of 50 people at the time was absolute chaos, and I'm sure you had a blast when you did so, but it still would have this awful gunplay that I don't like. Those dedicated servers were shut down in 2011, but Chaos Studios put in a client-side hosting option so players can host their own lobbies. It's pretty crazy. You can actually still find lobbies hosted on Xbox Live. I hopped into one and I played a couple of rounds to get a feel for what it was like. Obviously, it was only a 3v3, so I didn't get the full chaotic experience, but I could see this being really fun to drive around or fly in these big maps and engage in some of the chaotic stalemates over objectives. One of my first experiences with playing an online shooter was with Battlefield 2 Modern Combat on the PlayStation 2, and with the similarities between Battlefield 2 Modern Combat and this game, I bet this was an absolute blast. I'm not surprised at all that I didn't hear much about Frontlines Fuel of War when it came out. None of my friends were playing it, and none of them were trying to get me to play it with them. And why would we play this when we could play some of the other great games that were out at the time? Like Halo 3, Gears of War, Call of Duty 4, and Ghost Recon Advanced Warfighter 2, just to name a few. So thanks for sticking around to this part of the video. If you enjoyed the video so far, please click the like button and also consider hitting subscribe for more content. I've got a ton more games in my backlog that I want to play and cover, and I don't know exactly which game I'm going to play next, but I do know one thing for certain. I'm never doing another community poll again.